there weren't a lot of lawyers doing this. And I thought that we had to do something to one, demonstrate who we were pre-pandemic. And this is not just people on the right or left or whatever side you're on. This was Canada, right? We were made fun of for being too nice in movies. We were the talk of the town for holding doors open. But this was a country that did things like this constantly. And so I don't think what I've done is anything new or novel or even newsworthy, to be honest.
The lawsuits challenging vaccine mandates and COVID-19 restrictions are on the rise in British Columbia, although you might not know that if you only follow the legacy media. But here at Rebel News, we've kept you informed on many of those cases. And today I'm going to sit down with a powerhouse lawyer, Umar Sheikh, from Sheikh Law in Victoria. He's the former CEO of the BC Nurses Union, and he has had meetings with BC's Public Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, in the past about mandate-related issues. You're not going to want to miss a minute of this interview, including how groups of nonprofit organizations that Sheikh is representing are coming together. But before I jump to this interview, I want to let you know that Rebel News doesn't just bring you the other side of the story when it comes to what the legacy media won't tell you about COVID-19. We also help fight to restore freedoms in Canada as well. We partnered with the Democracy Fund at fightvaccinepassports.com, and thanks to many people just like you continue to donate there to continue legal battles that have done things like challenged BC's vaccine passport in Supreme Court here, a decision we are still waiting on. So please help us fight to restore freedoms in Canada by going to fightvaccinepassports.com. All right, Umar, thanks for being on Rebel News. Again, this time a lot of focus is going to be on you. I wanted to sit down and do this interview because you are representing many when it comes to the legal fight for medical freedoms and other types of freedoms in Canada. So thanks for being on Rebel News.
Thank you for having me, Drea. It's good to be here.
Now, just to give people some history of who you are, your firm is Sheikh Law inside of Victoria, but you were quite the powerhouse lawyer. One of the cases that you were involved in that I've mentioned many times on Rebel News, because BC's Public Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, was involved in that case, as were you. And that was the case where the nurses won their ability to not be forced to wear a mask to work if they hadn't had the flu shot. So tell us a little bit about how you were involved in that and your experience as a whole.
Sure. So I was involved as the CEO of the Nurses Union. I wasn't the lead counsel on it. We had very, very good lead counsel on it that are still out there. But that was a case that ultimately resulted in a settlement. And that settlement, Dr. Bonnie Henry and others were involved in. And it was around flu vaccine mandates. And part of the thinking there was that mandates can only get you so far. You can only force so many people for so long, and then your percentages will taper off like anything else. There's going to be a segment that doesn't want it or just won't get it because of the mandate. And so there was a recognition, at least in 2019, that taking a more collective approach to flu vaccinations, to promote them and to advocate the science versus mandate them, was a better way to go.
Well, when we talk about, how people start to taper off from following mandates, I think we're seeing that when it comes to how many are getting their boosters. And we'll see what happens now that they are allowing the vaccine for babies. Now, let's talk about the mandates against mobility rights and what you're doing there and how that all came together.
Yeah, so for Free to Fly, we're looking at the entire transportation sector in a multi-pronged approach. So we're certainly looking at the labor component. So we have obviously all of the different employees that you can imagine within the airline sector, and that includes pilots and flight attendants, ground crew, airport workers, security, passport offices. So that entire system has people out of it. One of the things that we recognized early on, and that's not really controversial, is that no matter what sector you were in pre-pandemic, whether it was healthcare or airlines or automotive, you weren't staffed up to extra staff. Nobody was operating above their baseline levels. And so you were always operating on minimal staff and overtime, hence the corporate way, right, to have your bottom line look better and reflect better. Now, when you even cut 0.2% of your baseline workforce, when you're operating in that type of environment, you've punched yourself in the face pretty hard. And I think a lot of what we're seeing in the airline sector and in other sectors when we look at staffing issues are a result of people leaving not just because of mandates, but for numerous other reasons. But certainly the ones that we represent were not just left, but they were put on leave without pay or terminated because of the vaccine mandate. And so we think that's unreasonable, given that there is a massive level of demand for these services, given that certain areas are calling people back, regardless if they've taken the vaccine or not. I think it's silly to maintain a fight over 2 doses and to keep punishing Canadians by keeping these people out of the workforce. I mean, they're in healthcare, they're in aviation, they're in government, they're everywhere, and they're ready to come back to work, they're ready to contribute. And their current medical status is no different than someone who hasn't gotten their booster. And that's according to Dr. Henry and according to Pfizer, Moderna, CDC, and all of those guys.
So you mentioned the passport and the airlines and other sectors, but I'm seeing these long lineups and these constant delays that are happening.
Ipsos polling done exclusively for Global News finds 6 in 10 Canadians are avoiding airports right now, choosing to cancel or delay travel plans. And 7 in 10 call the situation a national embarrassment.
I just recently did some reports in the Maritimes and had all 4 of my flights delayed. Do you think that ties into all of this? Is this an aftermath of the mandates or a combination of things?
Well, I certainly think it's a combination, right? I mean, the reality of institutional incompetence when we look across sectors and how they're crumbling has a lot more to do than just staffing. However, staffing is your baseline key component to everything, for everything working, whether it's your IT systems or any other systems you need to operate your craft and go on. If you take that staffing away, you'll have played a very dangerous game if you can't replace it with overtime or with trained employees. I think we're seeing the effects of that. We're also seeing the effects of a number of people who have moved out of the workforce and have moved on and weren't happy about things that were going on then and perhaps found a different pathway post-pandemic or at least post-lockdowns. So I think it's a conflation of factors, but I don't think you get away with just saying, well, it's too many things to fix. I think you start fixing where you can, and the first thing you can do, which is very easy, is bring a whole bunch of people back to work. Compensate them for their damage, for their lost incomes, for where they're at, but bring them back to work and get them back into the workforce. This is the easiest way to proceed, and it shouldn't require multiple lawsuits and interviews and other things that we're doing.
And yet here we are with multiple lawsuits happening, many of which I've covered as far as what's happening in BC. So tell us a little bit about the legal aspect to what you guys are challenging on behalf of aviation.
Well, as I said, in aviation, it's a multi-pronged approach. So we're certainly looking at the union's complicity in the airline sector, whether that be ALPA, ACPA, Unifor, or CUPE, or any of the other ones. There's about, I think, 14 different employees under the free-to-fly, or employers rather, under the free-to-fly mandate, and a number of different unions. So we're looking at separate employer actions, union actions, to hold them accountable for the harm that we say has been caused by either their deliberate action or their lack of action in the case of the unions. And we're also looking at passenger rights issues and a variety of other ways that we can support that sector in trying to have a much better voice. I think that it's very easy to, from the outside looking in, to say, oh, well, this is messed up and we just simply need to fix it. I think that what we are lacking is the basic building blocks of a civil discourse that allows you to hear the other perspectives and why those people aren't there, maybe why they're not coming back to work. But we're not doing that. We're being absolutists and saying they're the great unwashed, and so they're in this corner and everyone else is in this corner. It doesn't work, right? You're never going to achieve anything doing that. And so our hope in this multi-pronged approach is that we do generate discussion.
Now, what can you tell us about some of the other freedom-related projects your firm is working on? I know you can't tell us everything, but give us a little teaser.
Sure. So we've got the charter action that's currently in process for the British Columbia Public Service employees. That, I believe, is the only charter action directly tied to an employment order in this country. I may be wrong at this stage, or maybe more, but at the time I looked at it. We're also looking at a number of union actions that we're in the various stages of to file against the unions for their lack of representation, arbitrary or discriminatory behavior as we see it. And so those are all proceeding. There are a number of healthcare actions. We're representing paramedics, other healthcare workers, all of the healthcare unions across Canada, other than the BC Nurses Union, which I can't get into, but we're not representing members of the Nurses Union, but we are of all other unions, and it is all across this country. So it's growing.
And you're bringing a lot of different groups together. Now, something that stuck out to me was your actual retainer for some of these people. I mean, when you read it, it seems too good to be true. You are basically sort of on good faith, taking some of these cases of these people who have, in some aspects, lost everything. And in some situations, you're basically saying, pay what you can. Explain why you're doing that and how you can afford to do that.
Yeah, well, it's only in some situations. We were in a situation where, as this case was growing and more people were contacting me, we had developed not-for-profit societies, and that was the best way to group these folks. So whether you were the public service or the airline sector or any other sector, if you had a commonality of interest, it was easy to deal with you. As we started looking at the amount of damage that people had incurred, the mental health damage, it became apparent that there was instability in the groups. We reached 5 suicides, so 5 people had taken their own lives. And I received those calls, which are difficult to deal with when you're talking to other members of the group on someone who's killed themselves. When I looked at that, I knew that there needed to be another way. I couldn't represent clients who were unstable to this level. It's not their fault, but it's very difficult to translate that into a cogent legal case. And so the idea was that we created something called the karmic retainer, which essentially said that if we were going to represent you as a group, let's say there were 3,000 in a group or 5,000 in the case of the auto workers or whatever, but let's say you were in that group, that society had to have a hardship fund. And that was your first and primary obligation, was to help each other out with groceries, rent, kids' gifts, mortgages, whatever that you could. And it wouldn't be a lot of money, but whatever you could fundraise together would be for you. The goal there was to take that group and have them understand that, one, you had thousands of people supporting you that you didn't know about, and you thought you might be alone. And so those groups now have support groups. And 2, if you do need some money, there's money available to you as part of these groups' mandates to be represented by me. And then after that, there is a bill. It's not pro bono. There is a bill that goes to them, and we work that out. However we work that out, but it's certainly not a traditional relationship where I'm going after these folks and collecting on X things. I vet the case. I look at the need. There weren't a lot of lawyers doing this, and I thought that we had to do something to one, demonstrate who we were pre-pandemic. And this is not just people on the right or left or whatever side you're on. This was Canada, right? We were made fun of for being too nice in movies. We were the talk of the town for holding doors open. But this was a country that did things like this constantly. And so I don't think what I've done is anything new or novel or even newsworthy, to be honest. And I know the retainer leaked online, and now people are downloading it and just signing it and sending it back, which is not the way to go. I'm not your lawyer if you do that. But there are groups who are committed under this retainer model. It allows flexibility. It allows you to first take care of each other and build a community. These people don't get unemployment insurance. They don't have much support. They've been stigmatized. Drea, you have to remember the pandemic, it went in stages for people, but for certain people it didn't pass in those stages. So a lot of us went through the pandemic together. All of us did, and we were all scared and had mental health issues from that. And then the vaccine came out, and those that got it were clean and worthy of society, and that those who didn't seemed to be outcast. And for them, that trauma multiplied and continued while the rest of folks went on to restaurants and movies and barbecues. These folks are not invited to barbecues. They're still shunned by their friends. And so it results in some significant harm that we're not talking about, right? And you talk about the opioid crisis and other public health emergencies. You need to talk about some of the underlying issues of mental health that are causing that. I think we're ignoring it. So we needed to do something. We're hoping it's working. I haven't gotten more suicide calls, but and I hope I never do again. I don't know what we can do for these folks. Ultimately, there's no promises or guarantees, but I do know that I will try, and I will use all my experience and my resources in my firm, which is a growing firm of many, many staff that we're hiring on every day. But we'll use all of our resources to try and bring some justice back into the system. This is just one case. There'll be many cases I'll do after this, I hope, and if I want to, but this is not a case that I need to buy a yacht off of or a mansion or whatever. This is people who are desperate. I'm not trying to give them false hope, but I'm trying to give them some hope and some room to grow and get better, at least within their own groups.
Well, I like that you're humble and saying you're not really doing anything different, but I would beg to differ. I have a background as a mental health professional, and one of the reasons that brought me to my first protest with a mask on and everything was because I felt like mental health issues were being completely ignored by the unelected doctors who were making sweeping decisions around the country. And then later on, we saw the carnage from that. And then when it came to lawyers, Rebel News, we started our Fight the Fines. I think Ezra Levant had the idea of helping maybe just 100 Canadians fight their fines. And just like that, so many were receiving fines for just doing things we were free to do a few months earlier. And so it isn't every day that you see a lawyer in Canada who is A, willing to take on cases like this, and B, willing to address the mental health issues. So thank you for doing that. Let's talk about your experience as a lawyer and mobility rights as an issue in Canada. Did you foresee any of this stuff happening? And what is your message for people from a legal perspective 2 years into it all?
I don't think anybody foresaw any of this stuff happening. It was the black swan events of black swan events for corporations and governments alike. I think that we were certainly restricted from traveling, and I think that was all around the world. I think Canada has gone the extra mile. I mean, today they've put back random testing at airports, which was only gone for a short while. I think that the amount of people not being able to travel domestically for not being vaccinated was an abhorrent number of people who weren't able to go and see their families. You understand quite often that in a pandemic or in this type of black swan event, there's unpredictable responses. And so you don't really play Monday morning quarterback and say, well, you should have done this. It's always better on Monday morning and you can assess it. But at the end of the day, having the humility to say, okay, we were wrong, this may not have worked, this may have caused harm, and how do we fix it and move forward is the only way that I can see things working, right? I mean, these mandates may or may not come back in the fall, and again, anybody who predicts them now is probably wrong anyway. Mandates are all built on context. They're all built on what you're mandating, and that's is how you take those charter rights away under Section 1A of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That's an eraser. That's built into our charter, and it's built in for this reason, that in extreme circumstances, you can restrict and take away rights. But as that context changes, as it evolves, such as Omicron versus Delta, BA5 versus 2.75, or whatever you're at, then that decision-making adjusts to the context around you. It's not in a vacuum. What we seem to be doing and have done is made harsh decisions in a vacuum, implemented them, and then doubled down on that response. That doesn't show me growth. It doesn't show me learning. It doesn't show me an ability to adapt to the populace. 40% of Canadians, or British Columbians rather, have not gotten their third dose of vaccine. That's a massive, massive amount of numbers. And I know people are reporting on the fourth dose and access to it. And yes, there's a big lineup of people with the fourth dose. That's great. And I don't have any issues. I think you should get as much vaccine or as little vaccine as you want to get. That's the entire issue with bodily autonomy. But there's a number of people on the road to 4. You must go through 3. There's no other way to it. And so there's people who haven't gotten 3. And there's a reason for that, and maybe they're silent, maybe they're waiting, whatever it is. But if you mandate that many people and start disenfranchising them all over again, I don't know if that's sustainable. However, I don't know if the goal is to make it sustainable either. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the fall, Drea.
Well, where is the best place for people to go to find out about what you're doing in the aviation field and to find out about what you're up to in general and follow yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm on Twitter. I've just recently come on Twitter, and so I only post about case things generally there. And that's UASIND is my Twitter handle. SheikhLegal.com is the website that we're on. You can get a hold of us through there, through our inquiry address. We're always happy to have conversations, talk to people. We want to hear from you. We certainly will do our best to help everyone that we can, but like everyone else, we're resource limited, and there's only so many of us, and we're up to about 20,000+ now clients across this country in various different sectors, organized into these groups or organizing into these not-for-profit societies, depending on their status. And so it is going to get much bigger, and our hope is that we can shine a light on these issues, litigate them where necessary, and utilize the law, which we do believe in, and the judiciary, which we do believe in, to hopefully fix these things.
Well, thank you so much for being on Rebel News.
Thank you, Drea. It's great to be here.
If you want to find out more about the legal battles that Sheikh is involved in, I will link that in the description below in our written report for what you just saw here. And I will also have fight vaccine passports linked there too, if you'd like to donate to the Democracy Fund's ongoing legal challenges for your medical freedom.